Welcome to this part 2 video on the menstrual and ovarian cycle. So before we even begin, I'd like to mention that do not watch this video if you have not watched the part 1 video on the menstrual and ovarian cycle, because this part 2 is just a continuation, or rather the last phase of the video that I sent initially on the menstrual and ovarian cycle. So make sure that you check the videos in the playlist. You find part 1 on the ovarian and menstrual cycle. Alright, so basically in part 1 video, I just summarized what we looked at. So in the part 1 video, we talked about what the menstrual and ovarian cycle are all about. And then the key significant point that was mentioned in that particular video is that this menstrual and ovarian cycle, these are basically cycles that takes place simultaneously in a female. When we say simultaneously, they take place at the same time. And the overall goal is that they are just trying to bring about preparation of the female reproductive system for pregnancy. They're just trying to prepare the female, the matured female person for what? For pregnancy. Okay? I did make mention of the key important aspects that you have to know on the menstrual cycle and on the ovarian cycle. Remember, I said whenever I'm talking about the menstrual cycle, you have to be keeping in mind or taking note that I'm referring to the uterine lining, because everything that has to do with the menstrual cycle has to do with the uterus. Specifically, we said the endometrium. Then everything that has to do with the ovarian cycle, we said what? It has to do with the ovaries. So we ended on this particular picture in which I outlined what is happening in the menstrual cycle from day 1 to day 14. I also outlined what's happening in the ovarian cycle from day 1 to day 14. Then I did the same on what's happening from day 15 to day 28 in the menstrual cycle, and I did the same for what is happening from day 15 to day 28 in the ovarian cycle. So basically this picture served as the fundamental or the basic guiding tool on what you need to know on the menstrual and ovarian cycle. So today we're going to make progress and see what else you are required to know on the menstrual cycle. Mostly, I talked about most of the things in part 1 video. Alright, so as we are talking about the menstrual and ovarian cycle, I'm going to first start with this. So this is the part that I already explained in the part 1 video. In this particular part, or on this particular slide, it's just explained now using words. So remember we said the ovarian cycle, this is basically the cycle that involves the production, maturation, and ovulation or release of the female ovum. Okay, it's just a cycle that is involving one forming an ovum, maturing it, and being able to ovulate it on the ovulation day. That's the ovarian cycle. Okay, so it's important, especially if you are in college or university, to understand that this ovarian cycle has got different phases, just like the way the menstrual cycle is. Even the menstrual cycle, it is also in what phases. So to start with, the ovarian cycle has got what we call the follicular phase. Then there's also what we call the ovulation day. Then there's also what we call the luteal phase. The luteal phase. So all these concepts, they were explained in that part 1 video. And I was emphasizing that you watch that video first. So on the follicular phase, we said follicular phase takes place from day 1 to day 14. So what else do you have to know on the follicular phase? What is happening? I mentioned that from day 1 to day 14, because day 14 is the ovulation day. But what happens before day 14, which is from day 1 to the actual day 14, is that there's what we call the follicular phase. Just from the word follicular. This is a phase in which the follicles are maturing, and these follicles, if they are maturing, they just bring about maturation and development of the female ovum, which at day 14 must be ovulated. So follicular phase is just talking about that phase in which this particular ovum now is developing in a follicle from day 1, day 2, day 3 up to day 14. We call it the follicular phase. Now, it's also important for you to understand if this particular follicle is growing, if this particular follicle is maturing, then what is bringing about that maturation? What is bringing about that growth? So there's what we call FSH. FSH is follicle stimulating hormone. You can see that we've got follicular phase here. So what stimulates the growth of those follicles from day 1 up to day 14? It's basically follicle stimulating hormone. So follicle stimulating hormone is produced by the pituitary gland, specifically the anterior part of the pituitary gland. Remember, it has got two parts, posterior and anterior. Follicle stimulating hormone is released by the anterior pituitary gland, okay, or the adrenal hypophysis. And then it's also important for you to know that in the very days from day 1 to day 14, when this follicle stimulating, it's follicle stimulating. The way that the fact that it's stimulating is stimulating the growth of the follicles. So it is the follicle stimulating hormone that is making sure that these follicle, which are developing or they are being matured by this particular FSH hormone. Then you can see here that there's also an aspect of luteinizing hormone, LH. So LH as well is produced by the anterior pituitary gland as well. But the function of LH is not necessarily to bring about maturation of the follicle, no. LH has got a primary function in the ovarian cycle, and that is bringing about the actual ovulation. We usually say the surge or the increase in LH hormone, it brings about the ovulation. So key point, from day 1 to day 14, follicle stimulating hormone is going to be produced, as well as LH, but in little amount. Okay, but follicle stimulating hormone from day 1 to day 14, it's very high, because it's the one that is making sure that this particular follicle is growing such that at day 14, it will be able to be, ovulated. So that is from day 1 to day 14. Then on the actual day 14 now, on the actual day 14, this follicle now has already grown. The ovum inside, or the female egg inside, the oocyte has matured. It's ready to be ovulated. At day 14, we said in the average days of 28 days, at day 14, the ovum now, the actual female oocyte, is going to be ovulated. And I need you to know that the hormone that is responsible for the actual ovulation, for ovulation to take place, it's luteinizing hormone. And I've put it here, LH. Simple. Then we go to what we call the luteal phase. The luteal phase. Remember, I talked about the luteal coming from the word yellow. So after ovulation, this cycle is very simple. After ovulation, that particular, we call it the Graafian follicle. That follicle in which the egg or the female ovum was contained. Since it has now ovulated, it has released, this particular ovum. What will happen to that particular follicle? I said, will it die? No, it will not die. From day 15 up to day 28, it will be anticipating pregnancy. It will be waiting, if there's pregnancy, for it to be able to help. How does it help? It goes into what we call the luteal phase. So I want you to know that the luteal phase, this is just a phase in which now that Graafian follicle, which was containing the female ovum, will start producing the hormone which we call progesterone hormone. So it from day 14 to day 28, we call it the luteal phase. Because at day 14, there's ovulation. Then that Graafian follicle which was containing the egg will not die. It will keep on producing what we call progesterone. What is the function of progesterone? I said this progesterone now, since this particular, we call it the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum is the one that is involved in the luteal phase. That corpus luteum, the name changes from the Graafian follicle, because once ovulation takes place, the name changes from the Graafian follicle. That remaining, those remains after the ovum has been released, those remains, we call it the corpus luteum. It will start producing progesterone hormone from day 14 up to day 28. Imagine, just producing progesterone. Why? Because this progesterone, I like calling it the pregnancy hormone. Not that it's the one that is used to indicate pregnancy, no, but it makes the environment for pregnancy in the uterine lining suitable for implantation. So it will make sure that this corpus luteum in the luteal phase from day 14 to day 28, it will keep on producing progesterone, hoping that that ovum, which was released on day 14, is going to be fertilized. Then boom, nothing happens. Will luteal phase continue from day 28? No. It will go back to day 1 here again to say there was no pregnancy. So what do? I'll start again from follicular phase. That is how the ovarian cycle works. Now remember, I mentioned that the ovarian cycle and the menstrual cycle takes place simultaneously. So if something was happening in the ovarian cycle, then definitely there was something happening in the menstrual cycle. Key point. The menstrual cycle has to do with the uterus. So let's see on the menstrual cycle what is happening. Okay, so on the menstrual cycle from day 1 to day 5, remember I already talked about these things in the part 1 video. From day 1 to day 5, we call it the menstruation phase or the menstruation period. That particular phase in which the blood from the uterine lining, from the endometrium now is being shed off, when those spiral arteries, they're bursting and everything, because there's no progesterone now, which is making the environment suitable. From day 1 to day 5, there will be menstruation, which is the shedding of the stratum functionalis. I showed you the stratum functionalis, which is just the layer, the innermost layer of the endometrium, which contains the spiral arteries. It will start shedding off, and the spiral arteries, imagine, it's a layer that is being shedding off. And I mean, it's a layer that is being shed off, and then this layer has got arteries. We call them spiral arteries. Don't you think the layers are also going to be shed off? It's because of the shedding off of those spiral arteries that bring about the bleeding part, the blood flow part, which is coming from the uterine lining through the cervix, the vaginal canal, bringing about the menstruation. So from day 1 to day 5, menstruation, shedding off of the spiral arteries and the stratum functionalis. And then we said on average, at least menstruation in normal days, in a cycle of 28 days, it must not go beyond 5 days. So it simply means that from day 6 to day 14, will this person keep on undergoing the menstruation phase? No. It's supposed to cut normally. Why? Because there are hormonal influences that are going to stop this. I'm going to talk about them very soon. So from day 1 to day 5, menstruation. From day 6 to day 14, I talked about this thing. Since the layer now has been shed off, and the cycle must start again, because you don't want at day 14, when the ovum is coming, it finds this uterine lining bleeding. No. So from day 6 to day 14 is what we call proliferative phase or regeneration phase. There is regrowth of the stratum functionalis and the spiral arteries. Imagine, just from being shed off from day 1 to day 5, day 6 to day 14, they start reforming again. They start to regenerate. They start to proliferate again. So from day 6 to day 14, there is just the regeneration again of the same endometrium, the same inner lining of the uterus. It will start forming again, hoping this time around maybe there's going to be fertilization. So you must know that what promotes the growth of the endometrium lining, take this particular point, what promotes the growth of the endometrium lining or the proliferative phase is what we call estrogen. Because as you are moving from day 6, you are going to day 14. This is where now you're almost going to the ovulation. You are heading to the ovulation day, because from day 6, day 7, day 8, day 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, you are approaching the ovulation day. So it's making sure that by the time this ovum is going to be ovulated, it must find the lining is safe. It has been reformed again. The spiral arteries are there, there's blood supply, nothing is bleeding. No wonder I find that from day 6 to day 14, it's making sure, this estrogen is making sure that there is proliferation of the endometrium lining. This is even why you find that whenever a female person is going towards the ovulation day, because estrogen, remember, in the female reproductive system, is the one that brings about sexual or secondary sexual features in women. This is even why I find that as they're approaching the ovulation day, there's even something that happens to the breast. They kind of swell a bit, okay? They kind of swell a bit. Sometimes they're going to be paining a bit because of increased blood flow to the breast, okay? So this is because of estrogen hormone, which are high from day 6 to day 14. After that, day 14 to day 28. So this lining now has been made fit and safe for the incoming ovum at day 14. What happens now at day 14? So at day 14, let's assume that there's ovulation. Okay? Ovulation, the uterus is assuming that when this egg is coming, it's finding me fit. It's finding that I've prepared the environment. It's full of, fluids. It's full of nutrients. It's making sure that the uterine lining inside is suitable for implantation. So from day 14 to day 28, there will be what we call secretory phase. Remember, day 1 to day 5, we said the menstruation phase. Day 6 to day 14, we said the proliferative phase. Day 14 to day 28, we call it the secretory phase. And it's very simple. You know why? This secretory phase is as a result of the luteal phase. Why? Because I said it's the progesterone hormone that will start making the environment suitable for implantation in the uterine lining. So that phase now, it's progesterone which is bringing about the secretory phase. As progesterone is being secreted, the stratum functionalis now in the what? Remember, there's this concept we say in anatomy and physiology. When I'm talking about progesterone and the estrogen, we always say whatsoever progesterone is working on, it has already been worked on by estrogen. So estrogen made sure that there was a growth of the spiral arteries, stratum functionalis. What progesterone is just doing now here in the secretory phase is that it will make sure that this stratum functionalis is secreting nutrients. Okay, for those that do biochemistry, they understand. Okay, this making this lining will make sure that there's in that fluid in the uterine cavity, okay, has got carbohydrates, it has got the much needed proteins and everything, because everything is coming from blood, right? So even the spiral arteries, they're going to elongate even more, making sure that blood flow to that environment is perfect. So that's what happens in the menstruation phase. Okay, so there's menstruation from the menstrual cycle, preparative phase day 6 to day 14, and lastly the secretory phase from day 14 to day 28. If you've noticed here, I'm sure you can tell that there are certain phases that are taking place with from the menstrual cycle and ovarian cycle within the same days. So if there's a little phase in the ovarian cycle from day 14 to day 28, in the uterus there is a secretory phase from day 14 to day 28. I'll talk about these simultaneous phases very soon. So that is on the hormones that I want you to understand. Now, where we are going now, or what I'm about to explain next, because I've only told you that FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and LH, they come from where? From the anterior pituitary gland. But where is progesterone coming from? Where is estrogen coming from? Are they coming from the anterior pituitary gland? The answer is a big no. So then you must understand, how are these coming about? How are these hormones being formed? Now, let me just take you back a bit. So you have seen this diagram, right? Some of you have already seen this diagram. So this diagram is just showing the developing placenta here, the developing embryo there. Now, we are talking about, especially for the BSc students, those that are doing their degree programs. This is very, very vital for you. Anatomy. If you are talking about the menstrual cycle and the ovarian cycle, they will need you, even for those who are doing diploma, they will need you to explain how that particular ovum is developing in the follicular phase from day 1 to day 14. What is happening? Where is it coming from? In the first place, where wasn't that follicle developing back then? Why? Why is it that at puberty, that's when this female person is going to start the menstrual cycle? Those are the questions that they'll be asking you. And for the BScs, this is where we talk about the gametogenesis. That video is there in my video playlist. Make sure that you watch it. Talk about gametogenesis. So this particular diagram, I just want you to know that for you to perfectly understand the ovarian cycle specifically, how this ovum is being formed, how it's maturing, how it's being ovulated, you go back as far as when this particular female child was in the womb. You go back there. So we are going to go back. Let's assume we're talking about Mary undergoing the ovarian cycle, but for us to understand it perfectly, we must go back to when Mary was still in the mother's womb. So we're just trying to show that this is the Mary, the fetus. This is Mary, but in form of a fetus, when they were still in the mother's womb, because this is where the process of forming these female gametes or this female ovum started. No wonder we say that female gametes or ovums, they're always older than the actual person, because the time the person is being born, the time Mary is being born, during childbirth, these particular, we call them primary oocytes, they were already formed in the womb. So no wonder we're going back. So I'm just going to tell you a very simple story. In case you've forgotten gametogenesis, I'll just remind you of just simple things that you must remember, because for you to understand the ovarian cycle, like I mentioned, you have to go back to when this particular female person was still in the mother's womb. What was happening? No wonder I'm showing this picture. I don't want you to start remembering the histrophobic nutrition. No. I just use this picture to remind you that we must go back to the period when this particular female child was still in the womb. All right. Now, this is the concept. This is the concept. Now, before I even use this particular picture, because this picture is just summarizing, what happens in the ovarian cycle. Now, let me just take you back a bit, especially for the BScs. For the BScs, those who are doing degree programs, take note here. When you're talking about the ovarian cycle, this cycle starts to produce this ovum at puberty. Now, at puberty, I already said that the primary oocytes were already formed during when this Mary was still in the mother's womb. So how do you connect the concept? Some of you get confused because at puberty we start from what we call the primordial germ cells, or the primordial follicles. Not germ cells, the primordial follicles. They are the ones that go into form what we call primary follicles, granulosa cells, secondary follicles, Graafian follicle. Then this follicle is going to produce the ovum. That's what happens at puberty. But if you ask yourself, where are these primordial follicles coming from? Here's the simple thing. So we said, let's take, for example, we want to understand the ovarian cycle or how it happens in Mary, right? So let's assume that when Mary was in the womb, when she was just a zygote, okay, a zygote, from when the female sex cell and the male sex cell, they fuse together, they form a zygote. Follow through. They form a zygote. That zygote now will start undergoing cell differentiation. It's going to start undergoing cell division from 4 cells to 8 cells to 16 cells until it forms, and until it's implanted, it forms this particular embryo. So from this particular embryo, remember, there are a lot of layers that are going to start forming the trophoblast, those different layers, okay? I just want you to know that there's what we call the yolk sac, which is here, the yolk sac. So when this particular embryo, okay, reaches about, it should be about 6 weeks, okay, about 6 weeks. When this particular, female person is developing about 6 weeks in the female womb or uterus. When they reach 6 weeks, there's what we call primordial germ cells. This is for the BScs. Primordial germ cells, they arrive from the walls of the yolk sac going to the ovary. It's telling you that by the time this 6 week is done, in gestation period, from the time of fertilization, when you count from fertilization day up to 6th week, by that time the ovaries have already been formed in this particular female fetus. So at week 6 now, they are what you call primordial germ cells, which are coming from this wall of the yolk sac. They are going to the ovaries of this particular female embryo, for the better lack terms, okay? They will go now to the ovaries. When they go to the ovaries now, they will start to differentiate. They are going to form what we call oogonia. From oogonia, they are going to form what we call primary oocytes. So these primary oocytes in gametogenesis, we said they will be arrested at prophase 1 of meiosis 1. Remember, the process of forming gametes involves meiosis. So we said after forming zygote, this zygote will start undergoing differentiation of cells, forming until it starts to develop into an embryo. And then from this embryo, at week 6 of this particular female fetus in the embryo, the primordial germ cells from the walls of the yolk sac here, they will go to the ovaries of this particular embryo. And then these ovaries now, they will make sure that these primordial germ cells, specifically we say they have got a diploid number of chromosomes, which is 46. They will differentiate into what we call oogonia. From oogonia, you form what we call primary oocytes. Those primary oocytes now, they will remain dormant in prophase 1 of meiosis 1 until this particular embryo is going to develop up to 9 months, until the time they're going to be born. When they are born, does prophase 1 of meiosis 1 resume? No. So it's short. No female person is born with the Ogonia. Ogonia already differentiated into what we call primary oocytes at least by month 5, when they reach 5 months, meaning all the precursor cells that must form the ovums, which we call the primary oocytes, they have already been formed. There are about 1 to 2 million of them. They are already formed. When this particular female is being born, they don't have any Ogonia at all. They only have what we call primary oocytes that are in prophase 1 of meiosis 1. Now, when they reach puberty now, this is when now they start the ovarian cycle. So the name changes. Remember, before puberty, we said those particular precursor cells from the ovum, we are calling them the primary oocytes. The primary oocytes. The name changes when they reach puberty. From primary oocytes, we call them primordial follicles. So it's now these primordial follicles which were arrested at prophase 1 of meiosis 1 at month 5. Okay? And then they will now resume their meiosis 1 at puberty. And then they start undergoing the ovarian cycle. So that's the simple story that I wanted you to remember. Because they ask you a lot of questions here. So it's now these primordial follicles now, which were called the primary oocytes before puberty. At puberty, we call them primordial follicles. From this particular point now, they will start from each and every cycle that this woman is undergoing in the ovarian cycle. In 28 days, they will start undergoing this ovarian cycle and making sure that at least one ovum is produced in each cycle. So from primordial follicles, the name is going to change from primary follicles, granulosa cells, secondary follicles, Graafian follicle, until this Graafian follicle is able to produce the female ovum, which is going to be ovulated. Now, let me use this particular video here. I think for everything that I've explained here, starting from the embryo development, taking you back to gametogenesis may not be necessary for the diploma nurses, but for the BScs, that part is necessary. For the diploma nurses, all you have to know is that in the ovarian cycle, you just start from primordial follicles. Then you go to the primary follicles until you form the actual ovum. You don't have to start going back to the oogonia, to the primordial germ cells. That is for the BScs. Take note. Take note of that. So let me explain something again here for the BScs. Now, it's important for you to understand what is happening in the ovarian cycle using this kind of context. Okay? So, I said in the ovarian cycle, this is from day 1 to day 14. So what you are seeing here is from day 1 to day 14. Even here. From here, this is from day 1 to day 14. Because from day 1, you start the ovarian cycle. While there's the follicular phase here up to day 14 while there's ovulation. This cycle that you are seeing here is the same with this one here. Here I'm just showing you the specific things which are happening. Okay? So take note. I said from day 1, let's assume this is day 1, then this is day 14 while this egg is being ovulated, this ovum. So from day 1 to day 14, what is happening? So I said from day 1 to day 14, there's what we call follicular phase. If you want, you can just say from day 1 to day 13 because day 14 is the actual day of ovulation. So from day 1 to day 13 or 14, there is what we call the follicular phase where the follicle is developing. But if you ask yourself, how is this primordial follicle? Remember, primordial follicle, it was what was called the primary oocyte before puberty. Here we're calling it the primordial follicle. It's still in what we call 2N. This question comes in an exam. 2N, meaning it still has 46 chromosomes. It still has 46 chromosomes. But the female ovum that you want to produce, do you want it to have 46 chromosomes? The answer is no. It must have a haploid number of cells, which is what? 23 chromosomes. So what is happening here is that when the female person reaches puberty, we are using Mary. Now, Mary has reached puberty and she has started undergoing the ovarian cycle. So at day 1, the primordial follicle will start developing. Those things which we are calling the primary oocytes, they are now being called the primordial follicle. So if you look here, the primordial follicle has got flat cells. These cells in green has got flat cells outside. It's still in 2N. It still has 46 chromosomes. So this primordial follicle is going to form what we call granulosa cells. So granulosa cells, okay? Basically, this primordial follicle is shifting from forming these flat cells to what we call granulosa cells. These are not flat. And then the name is changing from primordial follicle to what we call primary follicle. This primary follicle, you can even see that what we call the zona pellucida is present. The zona pellucida here is what? Present. Okay? At the primary follicle. This primary follicle still has what? It still has 46 chromosomes. It still has 2N. So, what is making this follicle to start developing? Because you can see on the primordial follicle, it said the cells here, they're very flat. Okay? The granular cells are very flat. But at primary follicle, you can even see they are cuboidal. They have started forming the cubes. The question is, what is making this primordial follicle to start developing, to start to change from a primordial follicle to what we call a primary follicle? It's because of follicle stimulating hormone, which is coming from the anterior pituitary gland. So follicle stimulating hormone is acting, is traveling in the blood, going to the ovaries, making sure that this primordial follicle will start differentiating and developing into what we call the primary follicle. And then this primary follicle is going to develop into what we call the early secondary follicle. What's the difference? The primary follicle only has one layer of granulosa cells, but you can see the early secondary follicle has got multiple layers of the granulosa cells. So there is what we call granulosa cells and the thicker cells here. I'll show you a detailed picture very soon. But what I want you to know is that as these follicles are developing, remember I talked about progesterone and estrogen being produced. Estrogen and progesterone are produced by the same follicle cells, by the same follicular cells, the same granulosa and the same thicker cells. I'll show you a picture very soon. Then from the early secondary follicle stimulating hormone will keep on being produced from the anterior pituitary gland. That is from day 1 to day 14. It will keep on being produced, making sure that this follicle, you can see, it's moving from just like a small thing, it's growing bigger until it's forming this kind of structure because of the follicle stimulating hormone. Then it's going to develop into something like this, where you can see that we've got the thicker cells outside. Then we've got the granulosa cells outside. Then there's what we call the antrum, which basically contains fluid. That fluid is as a result of increased number of granulosa cells here and increased blood supply to the ovaries, which is making sure that this fluid now is going to be forming what we call the antrum. There's that fluid there. And then why is the oocyte? The oocyte is the one which is on the middle here. You can even see it. It was there, there, there. It's the same one now here, this oocyte. This oocyte will start developing by the help of follicle stimulating hormone. Okay? Then now you can see that there is what we are calling now, because here we've got what we call the early secondary follicle. At this particular point where we've got the antrum appearing, we've got what we call the late secondary follicle. Then we're going to form what we call, this is happening from day 1 to day 14. Then about day 13 to 14 there's what we call the Graafian follicle or the mature follicle. Okay, this mature follicle now has got any number of chromosomes. It has got haploid number of chromosomes. It simply means that meiosis 1 is done. So meiosis 1 is completed during the ovarian cycle, because we said before puberty, the primary oocytes, which we are now calling the primordial follicle, was at prophase 1 of meiosis 1 until puberty. Then after puberty now, it's going to finish meiosis 1. But the problem is that, remember meiosis has got meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. This Graafian follicle, the time it's going to ovulate the ovum at day 14, that ovum, yes, it's going to have haploid number of chromosomes, which is 23 chromosomes, but it will not complete meiosis. It's going to be arrested at what we call metaphase 2 of meiosis 2. So you can see at day 14, due to increase, you can see, due to increase of LH hormone, which brings about ovulation. Now, before I talk about how this LH is making this ovulation possible, I just want you to take note of how estrogen and progesterone are being produced by these follicles. So let me just get this particular follicle, which has got the thicker cells and granulosa cells, and show you how estrogen and progesterone are being produced, because I want you to know that estrogen and progesterone are produced by the follicles. So on the outer part of this particular follicle, you said we've got the thicker cells. And then on the inner part, these red-like cells, we call them the granulosa cells. Now, the thicker cells, they're the ones in green. Okay? They're the ones in green. And then we've got what we call these in pink-like. they are what we call granulosa cells. At BSc level, we must understand which cells produce progesterone and which cells produce estrogen. So you can see that these in green will be represented by this green box. These in pink will be represented by the pink box. Okay? So the thicker cells, they are the ones on the outer side. They produce progesterone. They produce progesterone. Okay? So all you have to know is that progesterone is a precursor for cholesterol. It comes from what we call pregnenolone. Okay, it's the precursor for progesterone hormone. It's okay. It's basically an androgen. Okay, so this particular this particular cholesterol is going to be worked on by what we call cholesterol desmolase enzyme to form what we call pregnenolone. Then this pregnenolone is going to be converted to what we call pregnenolone is going to be formed or converted to what we call progesterone. So key point is that in the thicker cells, that's where progesterone is being produced. But do you produce estrogen in the thicker cells? The answer is no. Why? Because in these thicker cells, there is an enzyme which we call aromatase, which is needed to form estrogen, and it's only found in the granulosa cells. So you find that these androgens that are being produced in the thicker cells, they are the precursor molecules for estrogen, but in the thicker cells, you don't have aromatase enzyme. So this androgen from the thicker cells, it's going to diffuse because these cells are just close to each other. So the androgens are going to diffuse into what we call the granulosa cells, these ones in pink. And then this aromatase now enzyme is going to convert androgens to form estrogen. So estrogen is being formed in the granulosa cells. That is the concept. Now, remember I talked about, you can see that the levels of estrogen are increasing here because the levels of estrogen from day 1 to day 14 must increase because why? We said in the menstrual cycle, from day 6 to day 14, it's the high levels of estrogen that will make sure that the uterine lining is regenerating and proliferating. Even the breast starting to pain and everything is because of the high quantity of estrogen that is being produced by these follicles. So as you are going towards the ovulation day, the number of estrogen levels, they tend to increase, making sure that the lining in the uterus is being prepared for pregnancy. So that's estrogen. That's how estrogen is being produced. Even progesterone is coming from the thicker cells, but before ovulation, the levels of estrogen are not too high. These are high-yield concepts that I'm telling you right now. Then, just know that when you're approaching day 14, the LH hormone which is coming from the anterior pituitary gland, when you're approaching day 14, what will happen is that, remember I said on this particular picture, you can see that a lot of follicles are starting this phase of ovarian cycle, a lot of primordial follicles, right? But only one of them is being ovulated. Why? Because others are going to die in the way. If they ask you what makes them die, it's because from day 1 to day 14, about the 10, 11, 12, 13, somewhere there, these follicles, they start producing a hormone which we call inhibin B. It's a precursor. It's a molecule that is going to inhibit the anterior pituitary gland to stop producing follicle stimulating hormone. So that particular follicle that had reached an advanced stage is the one which is going to survive up to ovulation. But the others, which were still, they have not been able to form the antrum, they have not been able to develop properly, they're going to die because the follicle stimulating hormone has been inhibited by inhibin B. Then that one surviving Graafian follicle now, which is in N, which has got haploid number of chromosomes, it is going to be worked on by what we call LH, luteinizing hormone, which is going to make sure that it's going to increase blood flow to the what? This is why I find that when someone's about to ovulate, usually the temperature increases because there's increased blood flow to the ovaries. That is making sure that this antrum start to grow bigger because you can even see the antrum here was small on the red secondary follicle, but the antrum on the Graafian follicle is big. The fluid here has increased. It's cutting around this particular also such that if this fluid increases too much, it's going to burst this Graafian follicle and then it's going to bring about ovulation. There are a lot of concepts that we can talk about in which LH can bring about ovulation. There are even what we call protease enzymes that are going to start cutting around this, but will not go in details. I just want you to know that it's the increase in LH that makes sure that ovulation is possible. So that is the concept of the ovarian cycle from day 1 up to day 14 for the BSs. Everything I've talked about on this slide is for the BSs. For the RNs, you are just supposed to know this for the sake of knowledge, but in your curriculum, I don't think these things are there. But for the BSs, this is a must-know concept. Okay? Now, remember I talked about since from day 1 to day 14, we are done with the follicular phase. We've been able to ovulate this particular ovum. Okay? This particular ovum, which is at which is in arrested in metaphase 2 of meiosis 2. It's ready for what? It will be ovulated. It goes in the fallopian tube for fertilization, or whether there will be fertilization or not, it doesn't really matter. Okay? At this particular point. Now, what I want you to know, in the ovarian cycle, what did I say? After day 14, from day 14 to day 28, the what we call the luteal phase. This Graafian follicle now, which was holding this particular ovum, is going to form the corpus luteum, which will start producing progesterone. How is it possible? I said already that the thicker cells, they produce progesterone. You understand? So, progesterone is going to be produced. If there's no pregnancy, they're going to start again from here. So, that's the concept. Okay? So, this picture is just a summary that is showing you that the anterior pituitary gland produces LH, which brings about ovulation. You can see here, it's making the egg to be ovulated. Then FSH is just making sure that this egg is developing from the primordial follicles. It moves, Graafian follicle, and then ovulation. Okay? Then, this is a summary of it all. Because from day 0 to day 14, if this is the ovarian cycle, you expect the primordial follicles to start developing. At day 14 here, there's ovulation. After ovulation, what happens to this Graafian follicle? It forms what we call the corpus luteum. Remember, this luteum is because of the word yellow. This corpus luteum will keep on producing progesterone until day 28. If there's no fertilization here, it goes back like that again. Then from the menstrual cycle, from day 0 to about day 5, there's menstruation. From day 6 to day 14, there's proliferation of the what? The uterine lining. Such that at day 14, as this ovum is being ovulated, you can even see the small spot there. It finds the lining properly fit for implantation. Okay? Then this corpus luteum now is the one which is undergoing the luteal phase. Luteal phase here, producing progesterone. Alright. So, recap, we've talked about fertilization, or the ovarian cycle, which at day 14, you can see this ovum being ovulated. It's being ovulated there at day 14. Coming out of the ovary, it's being collected by what we call the fimbriae. This is what we call the fimbriae there, which is just a fan-like structure from the, let me just zoom in. This is what we call the fimbriae. It's a fan-like structure from the fallopian tube. So this ovary is going to ovulate like a egg here, like a female egg. Okay? At day 14, then this fimbriae, because of this finger-like projection that it has, it's going to sweep and swallow this ovum, take it in the fallopian tube for fertilization, and it's going to settle at what we call the ampulla here. After that happens, if there's no fertilization, of course something is going to happen next. But just take note here. So at fertilization at day 14, you expect the lining of the uterus in the menstrual cycle to be what? To have already been prepared if you've been following through. So prepared uterus after awaiting implantation. You can see that this lining now, this is the stratum functionalis. It has got properly filled blood vessels, the spiral arteries. They are ready for the incoming ovum at day 14. Now, imagine there's no fertilization that is taking place. What will happen? The corpus luteum there, it will keep on producing progesterone hormone up to day 28, making sure that this environment here is sweet in case there's fertilization. Apart from that, it will make sure that this cervix part here is going to close. It's going to start producing thick mucus, hoping that nothing is going to come in because it's expecting that maybe this ovum has already been fertilized. You don't want another sperm to come in, right? No. Even infections, you don't want them to start coming in. So it's going to make sure that it's going to block this particular cervix part. No entry of things at all. Okay? Then, prepared uterus after waiting implantation. You can even see same things. The spiral arteries, they are waiting here. The blood is well supplied to this particular uterus. But if there's no fertilization, menstruation, after from day 14 to day 28, it's just waiting, this uterus lining. It's just waiting until day 28. If there's nothing that is happening, then the corpus luteum now, this corpus luteum I talked about, which was producing progesterone, is going to die. Why? Because there's a hormone which signals which signals it to say there's pregnancy or not. We call it human chorionic gonadotropin hormone. So if this hormone is not sending a signal to the corpus luteum that I'm here, fertilization took place at day 28 here, this corpus luteum is going to die. It's going to know that there is no fertilization. Why? Because whenever the fertilization occurs, there is a hormone which is produced in the female from the developing embryo, which we call human chorionic gonadotropin hormone. If that hormone is not there, the corpus luteum is going to die. And then, if the corpus luteum dies because it was the one that was producing progesterone, progesterone was the one that was making the environment in this uterine lining suitable for implantation. But the corpus luteum has died. Where will progesterone come from? Where will making these arteries rich in blood supply come from? Nowhere. As a result, they are going to die as well, shedding off, and there will be menstruation here. So that is about the menstrual cycle, the menstruation period coming about. So simultaneous phases, I've already explained this concept. Just take note that there are phases which are taking place at the same time. In the ovarian cycle, in the ovary, there is what we call the ovarian cycle. In the uterus, there is what we call the menstrual cycle. So which phases are taking place at the same time? The follicular phase is taking place together with the menstruation phase when the menses are taking place. But the difference is that the follicular phase is going to take about 14 days. Menstruation is going to take about only 5 days. Ovulation only takes place on its own. The luteal phase, which is producing progesterone by the corpus luteum, is taking place together with what we call secretory phase in the in the uterine lining. This is the summary of everything that I've talked about. Okay, you can see that FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, is increased in the follicular phase here when this particular follicle is developing. Okay, it will start dropping a bit, then it's going to increase here again, and then it's going to drop this side. You can see that LH is increased almost at ovulation day, between day 12 to day 14 is high here. Okay, then you can see that the levels of estrogen, they are high in the follicular phase. You can see here because of the glandular cells which are producing estrogen, which is bringing about the regeneration of the endometrium lining here. And then progesterone is always high from day 14 to day 28 because of the corpus luteum which was producing it. That is about the menstrual and ovarian cycle. So don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel. I hope from those basic concepts that I've given you, you will be able to answer questions on the menstrual and ovarian cycle.